Neaco Cosplay here. In this video I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to adjust a bought costume. When you buy a costume online, you of course hope everything will fit great, but we all know that that's not always the case. I have bought a lot of costumes over the years and some of them have been great and some of them needed a bit or quite a lot of tweaking. Adjusting a costume can sometimes be scary because some adjustments are permanent and well, you don't want to mess it up. But there are times that you're just gonna have to do it because what you got is not working. There are a few things that you can keep in mind that make diving in and adjusting a costume less scary. When altering a costume, I often start with the easy parts first and then taking on more difficult tasks one at a time. When you start easy and work your way up, the steps you need to take seem smaller and more doable. Sometimes you will have a piece that is just unusable the way it is. Starting with a part like that doesn't scare me at all because I can't use it anyway. So when I mess it up, it's not a waste. It also helps to think of a plan B, something you know will work when the first attempt just doesn't. That way it's less scary to try it because you know you have a backup when you mess it up. It can also help to try out the technique first before you do it on the real thing. For example, you want to glue some extra rhinestones on a costume but you're not sure that the glue will work. Try it out first on a piece of scrap fabric. That way you have practiced the technique and you know what to do for the real thing. Once you have convinced yourself that you're ready to take on your costume, there is a lot you can do or sometimes need to do, but not everything needs to be difficult. A common thing that happens is when a costume is a bit too big. That can sometimes be an easy fix. The easiest costumes to take in are the ones that don't have any lining and don't have that many details. Recently I bought a She-Ra costume and it was a little bit too big, but it wasn't lined and it didn't have any details on the parts I wanted to take in, so perfect. When taking in a costume, I always try to use the seams that are already there as guidelines instead of creating new ones. For my She-Ra costume, I took in the princess seams at the back and the side seams. And now the costume fits a lot better. Taking in a costume can be pretty quick with a sewing machine, but it can also be done by hand. It will take a lot of time, but it can be doable. Taking in a costume that is lined can be a bit more tricky. Usually I'm just lazy and I take apart the outer fabric and then the lining and then I just press those two together and take it in like I normally would. It's not very pretty, but if it's not visible, If you want a pretty finish, you can sew the lining by hand with an invisible stitch. I don't really know how to explain this, so I'll just show you a clip of what I do. There are many tutorials for this technique on the internet, so you can just look them up if you want to learn. The real problem when taking in a costume can be details like embroidery or a fabric that has a pattern in it. I haven't had to deal with this issue yet myself. What I probably would do is first look if the details can be removed so that I can add them again later when I have taken in the costume, or I would look for a part to take in that won't be that visible like the back or something that will be covered by another piece of the costume. The clothing isn't the only thing that can be too big. With my She-Ra costume, the bracers were huge. They literally fit my leg. They weren't usable at all, so I had to do something about it, and this is a great example of you can't use it anyway, so you have to adjust it. So it didn't scare me at all to take off the Velcro and cut in the material. When cutting off pieces, I always cut off a little bit less than I think will be needed, just to make sure I don't cut off too much, because you can always cut off more. And with everything sewn together, they look as good as new. Again, pieces like this can be sewn together by hand, or you could even glue them if you don't feel like sewing. Sometimes a costume can also be a little bit too small, and that can be a lot more tricky to fix than when it's too big. Something that I did once was take out the princess seams. You can only do this when the shirt is like one piece and the princess seams were just sewn into it to make it form-fitting. As you can see with the She-Ra costume, there is still some fabric here, and that could be the exact amount you need to make it fit better. Something else you can do is add a little bit of fabric, like I did with my Adora costume. If it's going to be a part that is very visible, I do recommend looking for a matching fabric as closely as you can. Something I have also seen people do to make a costume bigger is change the closing from a zipper to like grommets like a corset has. I haven't done this myself, but a quick Google search showed me that there are many tutorials out there for this technique. Something I also often fix is the way things are attached to the costume. This is often something that has more to do with preference than necessity, but it's just what I find easier. Again, using my She-Ra costume as an example, and the attachments of the cape were not how I wanted them to be. They glued on some safety pins, and safety pins, especially with a cape, make it just really difficult to attach it, especially if you have to do it yourself, and they don't look glued on very well anyway. So I took them off and replaced them with snap buttons. This is a lot easier to put on, and I prefer things that are sewed on than glued on. Even if I would have kept the safety pins, I would have probably sewed them on the cape instead of having them glued on. And this is something I often do, sewing on safety pins on the parts I want to attach to the costume, because it's easier to attach them and it's a lot more safe in my opinion. And if I don't care if they are removable or not, I will just sew them in place, because that way they will never move. I did that with my Supergirl cape. The snap buttons they added when I bought the costume just weren't working for me, and it would still be possible to get in and out of the costume with the cape sewn on. So I did that, and that cape is never going anywhere again. Sometimes a bought costume will miss certain details, and if you want, you can of course add them. Personally, I like to do that because it gives more depth to the costume and it makes it more accurate. But that is totally up to you. As an example, I sewed on a ribbon on my first Anna costume. It made it a bit more accurate and it gave it some extra spice. You could of course also glue on certain details, but I prefer sewing most of the time, because you can then just remove the details and start again if you're not happy with them. Another example of adding details is what I did with the white shirt of my Adora costume. I added the grey parts at the side and painted on all the details that the shirt has. This was a bit scary because I had to cut into the costume and paint on it, and those things are just irreversible. Luckily I had a plan B. White turtleneck shirts are easy to find, and I knew that if I messed up, I would easily find a replacement and didn't need to worry about that. Sometimes you will need or want to make a part of the costume yourself. Again, using my She-Ra costume as an example, it didn't come with a tiara, so that was something I had to make. The first thing I did was look up tutorials and patterns to make my job easier, and I was lucky to find a very good tutorial with a very good pattern. Using an existing pattern is often easier because you don't have to figure everything out yourself, and it just makes the whole process go a lot quicker. I have used many patterns I found online. Some were free, some I bought from example Etsy or other cosplayers, and I have always been very happy with what I got. The She-Ra tiara I had to make, but sometimes you might have a piece of a costume you're just not happy with and want to do yourself. I haven't done this yet, but if I would probably, again, look for patterns, look for tutorials, anything that could help me to speed up the process and make my job easier. There's absolutely no shaming that, and maybe you can even support a fellow cosplayer by buying their pattern or tutorial. And those were the tips and tricks I have for adjusting bought costumes. Some of these I also use when just making costumes, like the ones about the attachments or looking for patterns and tutorials. I hope you found this video useful and that you learned something from it. Thank you for watching and bye!